Hello and welcome to VHTB, your guide to the talent, culture, and capital forces shaping the hard tech ecosystem. My name is Justus Kilian. I'm a partner at Space Capital, and I'm joined by Seyka Mejeur at Astra Talent Advisors. How are you, Seyka?
Doing well, thanks. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And Matt Gjertsen from Built. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing great. Really excited for today.
Yeah, today's a really great conversation. So we're thrilled to welcome Andy Lapsa, the co-founder and CEO of Stoke Space. They're building a 100% fully reusable medium lift vehicle designed to operate like an aircraft with the high frequency. So we're going to unpack Andy's playbook on leadership, talent, and how to deploy the massive amounts of capital that they've recently raised to build the machine that builds the machine. One of the reasons I'm so excited about the conversation today is that the people that I most trust and respect in the industry and in my network speak so highly of you, Andy, as a leader and what you're building at Stoke. And I'm just really excited to understand what that is. So, as a place to start, it would be great to just, if you could describe the culture that you're creating at Stoke.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all, and excited to dive in here. We're, the company is trying to do something hard. It's trying to do something that some other very well capitalized groups are also not only trying to do but are doing, and that is to get to space. And really, what we want to do is open the space economy and make it, just an extension of the global economy. So that starts with the ability to go to space, maneuver through space, and come back. So that's why the whole, fully rapidly reusable rockets approach is important to us. Um, it's one of the harder things, one of the harder human endeavors to master, and that's also what makes it so much fun. I think, when it comes to culture, I think really what it comes down to first and foremost, and always, is the people that you put into the room. And so we've tried very hard to be selective, not only for people who have great skill and ability in what they do, but also, great humans who are going to, perpetuate the culture that we're trying to build. Um, so that's where it starts. I think, I don't know. It's pretty hard to, I guess, describe or put your thumb on what the culture is, but what I hope it is, and one of the great motivators for me is to not only try to do this hard thing, but do it at a speed that is commensurate or even better than the best other companies that are out there. And to do it in a way that has its own ethos, that has its own style. And we want to go and do the hard things, but we also want to do it in a company that is unlike any other and is great fun to be part of. So that's the goal.
I would love to pick up on that concept of speed that you mentioned, Andy, because I think, at least from my perspective, like that has been one of the definitional qualities of Stoke is the speed with which you all have moved. And I would love, whether it's from a pure leadership perspective or a culture perspective, everybody wants to move fast. But as you started Stoke, what were some of the things that you were thinking about of how can leadership enable speed? Like, what does that take?
Well, I kind of invert that. It's not great leadership that leads to speed. It's great people who are actually doing the work. And, the ideal scenario is I sit around and do nothing all day, right? So my my goal is to kind of unleash the potential of the people. And that really means, first of all, hire great people and set up a system where you can get out of their way so they can just go and crank. Um, that's it. And but I would say you have to be very deliberate, and especially as things scale, you have to be very deliberate about maintaining and keeping that North Star. And, there's a lot of different things that go into it and philosophies. I think it starts with hiring great people. When we started, okay, one of the, again, another big motivator or reason to start this company was I just felt like we had this opportunity now to, you could call it this, the second mover advantage. You had this talent pool that existed we started, basically in 2020, the talent pool existed that did not exist in 2010 or before, even 2015, just didn't exist, right? Uh, but by 2020, you had a whole crop of people who had come up and worked at other companies, and they've kind of taken their crack at things for the first time and tried a lot of things out. And varying levels of success. Even the most successful stories had varying levels of success and iteration that had to be, you know, uh, tried. And if you could take those people and say, okay, now you get a blank page, you get to do, you get to do this knowing everything you know now, you get to do it again, the best way you can. We had that opportunity in 2020. It didn't exist in 2010. So the very early group of people that we put together, we just sought out the best people that we've ever met to do X, Y, or Z. And that's literally what the first 15, 20 people were, and when you have people like that, you can just say, hey, I need a turbo pump or whatever. And then, a couple months later, a turbo pump pops out, and I need a test facility. And then, boom, test facility pops out. So that's the kind of caliber that you can start with. And when you start with that kind of foundation, then you can start building around that. And so as we scaled, we were very deliberate. Well, let's say one more thing. Since you have that level of autonomy in the organization early, it needs almost no management, right? Um, Maybe another element, and we'll get into this because it's one of the things I think is most foundational to culture, is trust. But we hired, like I said, we hired people who were simply the best people we've ever met in the industry to do the thing. That implies that we have worked with them before, and so there was some inherent level of trust between us already. And so when we say, hey, we need a turbo pump, I have trust that it's going to pop out, and the other person has trust that I'll be there for them for, whatever they need, usually money at that point. um, but there was that inherent level of trust. And so when you have that level of trust, you need almost no management. At some point that breaks down, you need to introduce management. And so we're very deliberate about thinking ahead and what our organization looks like at different levels and waves of growth. And then we start to identify, who and how we want to organize accordingly. And, just like our hardware and everything else we do, that's an iteration. Maybe we'll get it right. Maybe we'll get it wrong. We just have to iterate as fast as possible once we know that, we're not at the ideal.
One thing I want to highlight in what you said today, Andy, because I do think though you kind of push it off of like, no, it was just hiring great people. But I do think, especially in the engineering world, there's a lot of sense of, you know, being a leader means being the smartest person in the room, and it means making all the decisions.
100%.
How do you integrate the best aspects of those different experiences to have a unified team that's capable of solving the impossible physics of a fully reusable second stage?
Well, I think that what we look for is, we look for a handful of different things. You have to have the drive to, put in long hours and do the work. You have to have, top-notch skill. You have to have fantastic fundamentals because what we're doing is new and different. And even if it's not, there's probably a better way to do it. So you have to be able to fall back on, fundamentals. And so we screen for all those things. But I think the biggest thing, there's a couple of things that we look for, especially if they're coming out of different environments. So you mentioned some of the, legacy primes. There's some great people at the legacy primes. Um, when they come out, what we're, kind of on alert for is, does this person have a chip on their shoulder? Are they frustrated that they couldn't move faster? They better be, you know? Are they willing to put in hours? Again, they better be. Are they willing to think from fundamentals? Are they willing to, identify what was good, but also, what was not so good and, kind of reinvent? Are they malleable? And most importantly, in all of hiring is, what kind of learning slope do they have? If they're sponge for information, if they just have this track record of producing so over and over and over again, then that's a great indicator that this person's going to be able to drop in and focus on the outcome and not on, you know, other things, let's just say. So, you kind of have to, no matter where the person's coming from, those are the things that we look for. And then, we have 7 values. We have more values than that, but we have 7 that we've identified. and and we screen for each of those. And they've got to have them.
So, Andy, one of the things that you said that seems foundational to the culture you started out with was trust, and through trust, empowering the team to go and act. As you go from 10 to 20 to 50 to, hundreds, like how do you build trust at scale? And how do you continue to like empower team members? Because that idea sort of seems a little bit contrarian right now with founder mode, and everybody sort of, leaning very heavily into this sort of like strong, authoritative type sort of CEO. And maybe they're not mutually exclusive, but I would love to hear that, like how you think about scaling trust.
Well, listen, first of all, I think trust, again, this is the backbone of a healthy culture. And the reason I say that is if you don't trust the people around you in the room, then you think there's some other agenda going on. You don't feel like it's okay to speak up. You don't feel safe speaking truth to power. You don't feel safe, tossing out what you might think is a silly or a stupid idea. Some of those stupid ideas are the best ideas possible, right? You need this contrarian thinking in order to really move the needle. And so if you don't trust the people around you in the room, then you don't get that. And that actually terrifies me, at traditionally at the top of the organization. If people don't feel they don't trust the people around you to speak their mind, then how am I ever going to know what's actually happening in the company? It's terrifying to me. So you have to be very deliberate about it. Um, One other thing that's especially important for our business is, you have to trust the people around you to speak up for safety. If you don't have safety, then obviously that's not great for people. But it's also probably the fastest way to slow down and to derail the milestones is to get people injured. So obviously, as a human, you care about their well-being, but from a purely, cold company perspective, y it's not good. It's not good to not run a safe organization, so we take that very seriously, and, yeah, okay. What else? I think the question then becomes, how do you build trust and maintain trust? I think, there's a lot that goes into it. One of the best ways, no matter which way you're looking, up, down, left, right, one of the best ways to build trust with the people around you is to deliver for them, right? So somebody asked me XYZ, did I blow them off? Did I say, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll do that," or I'll look into it and then do nothing? You know, I better deliver for them. Uh, s- and you better deliver for me, by the way, also, right? You say you're going to do something, either bust your butt to do it, or raise the flag as soon as you can and say, "Hey, I'm going to struggle. I'm not going to be able to do this. I need help." Right? If you don't ask for help, then you're not going to get it, and you're not going to deliver. Right? So I don't know. That's a brain dump. There's a great quote. Let me see if I can reproduce it by Jamie Dimon, who said that if you have a problem, if you come to me with a problem, then it's our problem. If you have a problem and you don't come to me, or if you have a problem and you don't say anything, then it's your problem. And there's a great mentality, right? If you say something, then we get to try to solve this together, and we'll move the priority of the company as appropriate to help you solve the problem.
I love that. Is there practical things that you do like daily or weekly to model that culture and for new employees that are joining or folks that are moving up in the organization that make you approach, I mean, to make yourself approachable to embody that culture?
Well, by no means do I think that I'm perfect. I'm sure I'm not on this front, but I try. Um, well, we do a handful of things. As for me, as much as it is for anybody else, when people start, we do an onboarding session. I meet every person who comes in the door. I try to. Um, I try to I try to stay in touch with what's going on in the company, in the factory, in the different, we have used Slack, so in the Slack channels, I at least want to be well read on those and just to understand, what's happening at the different groups in the company. I chime in from time to time. Um, but I think the biggest thing is I deliver, I try to deliver what we claim we're going to go do. Uh, for everybody in the company. And that could be a small thing, it could be a big thing. I hope I hope people feel that there's a wide open door philosophy, and if they see something, then they're going to say something, raise the flag. Um, we'll see.
Kind of stay on this idea of like of tactical things. I'd love to, going a little bit beyond just kind of this idea of, you know, asking for help and delivering for people, especially early on. Like there's always more to do than can be done. How do you at Stoke like figure out like what is the priority? What should you be working on? What are things that when people come, whether it's how do you know these are problems that I need to solve for somebody now, but then more importantly, like how does the team know where to push their resources most efficiently?
Well, that's something that we look at quite regularly. We do we do a Monday morning, 8 a.m. company wide stand up. It's 15
I love
minutes,
it.
it's not very long at all. But in that 15 minutes, we try to cover the major priorities that we have this coming up this week, what we did last week, and how we tracked against that. And so behind that 15 minutes, there's a very small group, but there's a group of us who kind of have the exact discussion that you just mentioned. What is the priority? What are our bottlenecks? Where do we need to, apply some help or shift focus or whatever? And so we do that, as the end of the prior week gears up, we do that, and then make adjustments and then go forward. Sometimes we'll bring, we have again, it's a small group, but we do have a weekly with a small group of leaders. And, we'll bring in, the REs from any level, whoever's stuck on the critical path or whoever is just needs the help, right? We'll bring them in and be like, okay, what do you need? We all work for you. Tell us what you need.
I love that.
And they're like, I need 3 technicians because, I've got XYZ and I can move faster. What do you need and how can you move faster? And, they'll say it. Sometimes, it's like, okay, well, there's, priority conflict. We won't be able to pull that off, but, we'll move heaven and earth to try to make it happen.
I love it. It sounds like a variation. There's been a lot of talk recently, mainly by Mark Andreessen, about like Elon's leadership style, about how he individually goes to each, limiting factor of the business and solves it. And it sounds like it's, again, it goes with your culture of you're doing a similar thing, but at a leadership team level where the whole team is going to solve the constraints of the business together. Which sounds
Well,
great.
hopefully the mentality perpetuates, right? I mean, hopefully people are doing that at every level. What is holding me back and what is it going to take to go faster? Right. And you attack the bottleneck consistently.
I want to move in a slightly different direction. It ties into a lot of what you've been talking about with trust, being able to work the hours that are required, being able to be an excellent performer in your technical skill. This is like one of my favorite questions. So I'm curious, much of a company's culture is defined by leadership at the very top, right? What are some of the life habits that keep you at your top? I'm thinking more from like a personal perspective, physically, mentally. Like how do you keep yourself in top shape? What are some of your favorite habits to keep yourself operating at your best?
Well, just to be clear, I am definitely not in top shape right now. I went mountain biking recently for the first time in at least since I started the company and probably close to, I used to go all the time. I love it. And it was not pretty. So I am not in top shape at all. But I want to be. Here's well, first of all, I have to love what I do, and that's very simple. But if you love what you do, then you don't work a day in your life. So I really do think that's important. Maybe number two is having a very strong, having a strong foundation. And, for me, I've got an incredible family behind me. And if you don't have that, then everything else is going to be a lot harder. So, you got to take care of that. There's a book called Brain Rules, which was actually, there's two. I think they've got a series now, but okay. So there's Brain Rules, which I thought was very interesting, is kind of formative, and how I think about specifically sleep and exercise, that I think are very important. There's also one, for parents or new parents. There's also one called Brain Rules for Babies. It was probably the only quote unquote parenting book that I thought was worthwhile, for whatever that's worth. Not getting paid or anything for that promotion. But anyway, so Brain Rules talks about, I think he's got 7 or 12 brain rules. But the thing that shocked me about these was, first and foremost, the brain is in survival mode. Like it has to survive. Nothing else matters except for survival first. Okay. Now, actually, we can come back to that in a second. But, from on the surface, hopefully most of us are in a position where we're not worried about surviving day to day. We've got food, we've got a shelter. Yeah, the lions aren't hunting us.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Right,
You gotta have
right.
them. You gotta have them filled.
And
Yep.
immediately after that is exercise first, and then sleep. Okay, it's pretty unbelievable the impact that exercise has on the brain. It's also pretty unbelievable what the impact of sleep has on the brain for critical thinking, for creativity, for attention to detail, for focus, all kinds of things, for health, but for very material things to a business and to operating well. Sleep and exercise are just incredibly important. Those are two very hard things to maintain in a high intensity, go environment. So I try very hard to protect those two things. I just mentioned I'm in horrible shape right now. I have not protected exercise nearly well enough. But I do try very hard to protect sleep, and I'm reasonably successful at it.
Awesome. I love that. I relate so deeply to I'll have to read these books. The Brain Rules for Babies sounds awesome. I'll add that to my spreadsheet for new parents that I've sent
There
out
you go.
probably to a handful of people who are listening right now. And send that out more than I probably should, but I'll read that. That's very fun. And yeah, I'm like religious about exercise primarily because my brain does not work as well if I am not exercising basically every day. So I really feel that impact, and it's a non-negotiable.
Look, I've been in very intense environments, created them for myself, worked, all of the hours, and that's important in stints. But what I've found and now know and hold, very very true to me is when you do that for a prolonged period of time, your efficiency just goes to crap. Now you can kind of power through certain things, but when you need to be high intensity, alert, you can run on adrenaline for a while, but you're going to get sloppy. You're not going to be creative. Your mind's going to wander. Uh, you're not going to be on top of it. And so if you can design your day and design your sleep, you can get at least the same amount done, probably more, and definitely better in fewer hours with more sleep. It's very
Okay,
important.
last one on this topic, but to dig on kind of mental clarity and sleep. Are there any fun things to talk about, like a smart mattress, or that you're probably sponsored for highlighting? No, I'm just kidding. Like monitors or meditation or cold plunging.
I've got none of that.
All right.
Not the right person for those things. But I
It
would say
can be done
listen
holistically.
listen to your
Yeah.
body, I guess,
Yeah.
Body
I
will
love
tell
it.
you what it needs. I don't know. I think if I wore one of those, what are they, the Aura rings or something? I don't use my phone for, sleep metrics or anything. I think that would stress me out. Like, I don't want to see that.
It could be I think that happens with a lot of people. It becomes like a doom loop where you
Yeah.
see that you're getting bad sleep, so then you stress about it, so you get worse sleep, and then it just unravels.
Yeah. No, I don't want that.
So maybe it makes sense to dive into more of the talent equation now. You've mentioned that early on it was so important to set that bar really, really high within the organization. And, it's consistent when you talk to a lot of founders, they want to recruit the best, they want to bring on the best. And when you work directly with people, you could say, like, I know directly these people executed at a high bar. As you start to move beyond 10 into, a much larger organization, it becomes harder to define and keep that talent bar high. How have you guys been able to do that? Like, how do you know you're hiring the best? Like, what threshold? How do you know that you keep yourself to that high bar?
Well, culture perpetuates. So, um, you have to be pretty deliberate about the people who you select to be the next, the wave of leaders who are going to, ultimately make those hiring decisions and make sure that, you're like-minded. And one of the most important attributes of a leader is um, how they judge and select talent, because that's what they're going to build underneath them. Um, so I think that's really, really important. I think having clarity on what's important to us as a company is important. I used to, a lot of companies have their values, and you know, not sure how I've felt about that, especially when I was young. But at this point, I think it is very important just to provide a North Star. Like, what is important to us as a company? And taking a minute to define those things is useful. It just keeps everybody kind of focused on the right road. There's a very a typical thing that happens where you have somebody who's interviewing and they're just fantastic at the technical stuff, and they're just a pain in the ass to work with, and you know it. And you're like, but they're so good, you know. And if you don't have that North Star and that clarity to say, yeah, they're really good at the technical side, but guess what that means? That means that, you know, 5, 6, 10 people around them are going to be pissed off when they come to work. They're going to get stomped on. They're going to get overrun, whatever it is, right? Like that's not a hire. And it's painful. It's a painful no, but that's a no. I love sports when talking about management and philosophy, because it's just everything's out there. Not everything, but a lot of things are out there, right? You look at different management styles, coaching styles, you look at different athletes. There's the star athletes who are just toxic on the sideline. And those teams never win Super Bowls. Almost never, right? Um, you look at different coaching styles, and different coaching styles can also be successful. And so again, I guess I mentioned at the beginning where I'm pretty motivated to try to deliver results, but do it with a little bit of a different style from others that are out there, and show to ourselves and to the world that that's possible. You can have kind of a player's coach, so it's like a Popovich, super super successful basketball coach, or you can have a Bobby Knight, also successful in terms of wins and losses. Very different styles, right?
When it comes, you mentioned how during the hiring process, in order to you kind of hire against some of those values, how are you tactically doing that? Are you giving like ratings for different values versus the technical score? Are there certain questions that you ask? How do you do it as part of your process?
Yeah, we'll have a panel of people, and each one of them is assigned a value, and then we kind of have sample questions that
I like
they
it.
don't have to use, but they
I like
can
it.
use to try to assess that particular value.
I love it.
And is there typically like an immediate debrief after the interview? I mean, sometimes like so values can be hard to maintain consistency, and so like often a discussion can be helpful to sort of unpack some of the nuance and the details, or is it more like algorithmic? This person scored like this level.
It's much more
How do you?
discussion. It's much more
Okay.
discussion. Yeah. So we do debriefs for all of them and make sure everybody's on board.
And what's your view on being involved in the hiring process? Like, Elon supposedly was involved with, every interview up to like, 5,000 employees or something in the organization. Um, is that something that you spend a lot of time on still? How have you thought about that in terms of your time and priorities?
Well, I would have liked to. I did not do that. Um, but one of the reasons I did not do that is because my co-founder Tom is an excellent interviewer, and we have found that we have a very similar eye for talent and judging them, and honestly felt a little bit redundant. So what started happening was I'm traveling a lot. Uh, we had to raise money. I didn't get to start with $100 million to get going, right? I had to scratch and claw for that. And so I was, I'm on the road, and now I'm a bottleneck. If I'm on in every interview, but I'm not there, I'm a bottleneck. And Tom is a fantastic interviewer. And again, I almost feel redundant. So Tom was on a lot more of the early interviews than I was. For the critical ones, obviously, I'm gonna be part of that. Oh, they're all critical, but for the management leadership ones, um, but I felt like Tom was on, and he did do that, right? So between the two of us, we did the same concept. It just wasn't me personally.
Andy, with the recent Series D expansion, you to 860 million. Is that right?
Yeah, over the D and the D2, yeah, it was A60. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You now you've got the capital to hire massive waves of talent. And Stokes headquartered and testing in Washington State. I actually just moved from Washington State back to LA, so this is appropriate. I know the PNW well, and the PNW has deep aerospace roots. How are you convincing the top 1% of engineers to relocate away from the massive new space hubs like LA or Texas? And how do you manage that massive influx of new people without breaking your culture?
Well, I think the first thing I want to emphasize is we've raised a lot of capital that does not translate to massive hiring. We're very deliberate with our hiring. We have been from the very beginning. We've raised a number of rounds, but our hiring, if you look at our hiring curve, is just very methodical, and so that continues to be the plan. Um, uh, how do we recruit to the PNW? Listen, I think the PNW is just underappreciated by most people in the country. I came from the Northeast. I never heard of the only thing I knew about Seattle. This will date me a little bit, but the only thing I knew about Seattle was Sleepless in Seattle. It's just this movie, with a lot of rain and whatever. PNW is incredible, right? PNW has water sports. You can drive in fact, when we drive, it's a 3-hour drive from headquarters over to the test facility. And you're going to go through basically rainforest, mountains, snow, back down. And on the other side, you're in desert. You go through so many different climates. And so no matter what you do outdoors, it's just an outdoor playground, almost unlike anything else, right? Um, and then we're on Puget Sound. There's water. People go sailing, flying. It's huge flying culture. There's professional sports. There's a lot of culture in the city. Um, so it's a very unique and high quality lifestyle that the PNW can offer, and I think people don't appreciate. The mountains are just spectacular. So many mountaineers, and you know any mountain sport, mountain biking, skiing, whatever it is. There's a lot to do. And so that's pretty exciting. I've always grown up, kind of with the work hard, play hard mentality. I think that's really healthy, right? Some of the best ideas don't come when you're sitting at a desk. Some of the best ideas would come you know, when you're skinning up a mountain, just kind of in
I
the
love that.
zone,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. There's a big aviation community, but you have to have your IFR.
I gotta interject because I'm from Gig Harbor. Is the phrase the PNW a thing? Is that a new thing? I don't remember. That was not a thing when I was growing up. I've never heard that term
Bumper
before.
stickers, there's all kinds of stuff.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I've
it's
never heard of
fully
that
a
before.
thing.
It's definitely
Oh
a
my
thing.
god. Okay, that's got to
Yeah.
be new because I lived the
This is
first
gonna
18
be
years of my life up there, and it didn't exist.
this is gonna be like red car effect, Matt. You're gonna
I'm
hear
just gonna see
this
it everywhere now. Okay.
8 times a day now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's true. It
Yeah.
is. I mean, I've
Okay.
been
Well,
here,
but I
what,
mean,
16 years, and it was
interesting. Well, you both are saying it, so it must be true.
okay.
I must have missed it out.
So I love the P&W highlight reel. Do you find that most of like the candidates that you're recruiting, this top 1% of engineers are compelled by that vision? They're like, has this been a tough piece for you? Or are you saying actually once people get a taste of it, they're pretty compelled by it? It's not really that big of a hurdle.
I've found that I think the biggest headwind to getting people to relocate was COVID. Nobody wants to relocate after COVID. I don't know if you guys find the same thing, but it's very hard to get people to move now that there's, I think COVID was part of it because remote work became so much more popular. But the big thing is we can do this so much more readily now. And remote work has become more of a thing. And people just don't want to move. People with, people who are mid-career and up, nobody wants to move. I think that the work is, early career folks who are driven they're going to go and find the work as they should, at least the ones that we're looking for. And so, whether that's in Central Washington or at the deepest, southest tip of Texas, wherever it is, they're going to go, where they're going to build their career and get the best experience. And so that's kind of the other more important part of, what we would sell is you come to our company. We're doing some of the most advanced rocketry that's out there. Honestly, our vehicle stack is the highest efficiency, fully reusable rocket that exists. Full stop. It's pretty exciting. We're doing it with a team. We're 350 people today, and that covers engineering, design, manufacturing, test facilities, designing and then operating the test facilities, designing and operating the launch site, and then all of the G&A, the overhead, right? Recruiting, finance, all this stuff, right? 350. So when you come to our company, you will have more ownership than you will have anywhere else on the most exciting technology that exists. And you're going to be working with people who are the best in the industry. Like, I really think that we have the highest concentration of talent. So everybody around you, you're going to learn more from than you will anywhere else. It's the highest concentration of talent. It doesn't mean that we have everybody who's good. It just means that the concentration is very high. And so especially for the people, well, that just makes it fun. If you're good at what you do, that makes it goes back to trust, right? If you're good at what you do, then you're going to hold a high bar for everybody else. You're going to have big expectations for everybody else. And if they deliver, that's fun. That's fun. And I think, who wouldn't want to be a part of that?
That is the most absurd stat I've ever heard. That number of people that you have and everything that you've done. That is just quickly, kind of on that note, Seyka asked about the funding rounds that you've done. You said despite those rounds, you keep consistent hiring. Is that something that you ever have to kind of push back on leaders on? They find out you got some resources. Oh, we need to hire. That they feel like the constraint is, or because of the way you've hired, people know that they want to limit hiring.
Matt, this is what's so amazing. I actually push the other way in a lot of cases. And I have people
That's
who
great.
are saying, no, we're not ready for
Yes.
that yet. Because
Yeah.
by the time if you add people to a process too early,
Yes.
then you will reinforce a bad process. And so you need to invest time in getting that process right so that the machine is efficient, and then you can start adding. And I'm here saying, we got to go faster. We got to go faster. Just, like whatever you need. Do we need more people? Let's get more people. And they say, and I actually get pushed back the other way.
That's awesome.
Now, it's not across the board true. There are other areas where, we are trying to build teams and, expand them. Pretty much across the board, we're trying to do that. And then the question is, okay, how can I help you, recruit and find the great people who, check all the boxes and grow that team?
Has any of that efficiency been a result of, you know, new software solutions for hardware engineering. Now there's a lot of vendors out there that, make your data much more manageable, much more accessible. A lot of people are using, these LLMs to accelerate, internal operations. There's a lot of speculation on the software side that organizational structure could fundamentally change and you could scale companies with way less people. I don't know. How do you think about that from a hardware perspective?
Well, I think that's by and large very true. I mentioned the talent pool that exists when we founded the company. There were a couple of things that had to be true for me to gain the conviction to actually start this company, which I say it often. It was highly unintuitive to start the company to the point where it felt irresponsible, right? And again, I mean, I had a family to feed and all this stuff, and goes back to having that great foundation where I had their support, and once I had that, I said, okay. But the things that I needed for myself were, we had we had a second mover advantage. We had this new talent pool. We had commercial applications that started to make sense, from business cases perspective. We had a technical foundation that goes back to the 50s and 60s that we can lean on. And then the last piece is that we have these engineering tools, software tools, and analysis packages that simply didn't exist certainly 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever. So you can literally do more with less. Okay. And all of those things, that was basically the thesis or conviction, along with the fact that I think that you need fully rapidly reusable rockets in order to do what we all talk about in space, blah, blah, blah. But from a team perspective and a timing perspective, all of those ingredients had to be true. And that's why it made so much sense to me. Now, fast forward and you have all the AI tools coming out, and et cetera, et cetera. Look, I think that's an accelerant, but there's no shortage of work to do. So what those things are going to do is make each individual more efficient, but there's no shortage of work. So we're still going to have to scale a team, right? And I will say, when we set up, when we started the company, we are part of that new wave of talent who have been through the process before, and you kind of knew potholes to look out for. And so not only that doesn't just translate to the technical design of the rocket, but it's also how do you design the company? Yeah, you got a little experience under your belt, some good and some bad, and you get to draw from that past experience to design the company in a way where, here's what I would do if I had a chance to do it all over again. This is that chance. And part of that is we do build our own software in a lot of cases. We do our own data handling. We actually have a product called BoltLine, which we use for our internal operations. And kind of spans, everything from engineering down through part retirement, really. But that's where we do all our factory planning, our inventory control, our work orders, procedures, our test procedures, or launch procedures go out of that. And then we tie data to that. And so we have just end-to-end traceability of everything that's happening in the factory and all the parts that go out and onto the rocket. And that's an opportunity where, the latest developments are an opportunity to make that even more powerful. And so we've been kind of flexing that muscle as well.
So you started to take us down a path where you shared how you started to build conviction around pursuing the company and what had changed, that made you believe the timing and the possibility was right, despite it being a terrible time in the market to go and found a medium launch company. There'd been a wave of companies that were overfunded, underdelivered, and now you've got somebody who's coming to market and saying the best place to start is with the upper stage and to go fully reusable right out of the gate, right? And so the investor mindset is like, wow, that's going to be really expensive. It's going to require a lot more capex. And so, sure, you had this second mover advantage, right? Knowledge compounds despite the failures of these other companies, and you were able to learn from those lessons. But how are you able to convince, early on investors to sort of align behind this vision despite all the headwinds? It was very contrarian, and that's hard. It's really hard to build alignment and build buy-in from folks, when the whole market sees it differently?
Yeah, it was hard. um,
What worked?
well, I think okay, you I think pretty accurately captured the snapshot of the industry that or like the environment that we were walking into. I definitely underappreciated a handful of other factors. Um, but there was a lot of capital that was already deployed, and let's call it those chips are off the table for us. And so, especially early on, we sort of had to scratch and claw and try to find our way and build our believers. What I what I think worked out best for us, the reason that we're still around is because we have been able to deliver on what we said we were going to do uh, so far, right? There's a whole lot more to do, but so far we've been able to deliver. And so it goes back to trust. Are we delivering for the investors? So one of the things that we tried to do to position ourselves very early is, kind of let the hardware do the talking. There were a lot of other companies who, you know, made some, impressive claims. They had a lot of, marketing muscle and finesse behind them, and we didn't have any of that. And what we said we were going to do instead was just be very pragmatic. It made our lives harder at the time, maybe, but or maybe not. Maybe we wouldn't have made it as far if we took a different road. I don't know. But what we said is with very, very, I mean, it's like comically bad PowerPoint, but graphics. But what we said is this is what we're going to go do. And then we just started executing and we start, check off one thing after the next. So every investor call that I went back to, it was very hard to get the ball rolling, but there were a few people who were willing to take a call back in, a month or 2 months or 3 months. And when I did that, I was able to say, hey, last call, I showed you this chart. Here's what we said we were going to go do. And by the way, we did this. And we're looking ahead to this next set of milestones as well. And just lay down a track record of execution. And I think that ultimately is what kept us alive.
And how do you fulfill that promise? So early on, you said, one of the most important things to trust is to be able to deliver on, what you say you're going to. When you're incredibly resource constrained, how do you fulfill that commitment, with investors, with these key people that you've hired? The money's not coming in the door, it's longer, everything's slower, everything takes more time, everything's more expensive. Like you in that leadership role, how do you balance that between like, I'm going to make sure I've got your back and I'm going to give you what you need, but we've got these very limited resources to be able to do it? How do you bridge that?
It starts out by putting together an executable plan. And that executable plan survives exactly 0 seconds with reality. And then you work your ass off.
So you went then from, the very earliest stages, by series B and C, that was 2023 and 2025. It was coming off of this peak of, 2021 metaverse, tons of money went out the door. Um, a lot of investors actually closed up shop. There were just fewer firms available, less interest in deep tech. Like hard tech was not sort of an area of interest. Defense tech was maybe getting a little bit more interest because government was spending while enterprise spending was down. Um, but a lot of the growth investors that you'd probably be raising from just left the market. Um, how did you what did you do? How did you catalyze those rounds? Who did you go talk to? How were you able to build conviction? You're now facing a second wave of sort of structural challenges as you're at this critical point where you're starting to ramp up.
It was very hard. Um, in fact, in hindsight, we had terrible market timing with this company because when we founded in very late 2019, but Tom and I had the thesis, and we simply like looking around there, we didn't find another company that had the right thesis. We what do we say that had the right thesis, the right team, and habitual execution. Those are three things that I wanted in the next company I look for. And so we couldn't find that, and blah blah blah. We started this company very late 2019, but we had no actual execution plan. We had no technical design. And so we started it and gave ourselves a window to basically lock ourselves in the basement and figure it out. And if we didn't have something compelling by the end of that window, we were going to say, or well, at least I was going to say, all right, well, we gave it the college try. I won't regret trying, but now it's time to get a real job. By the time we felt we had conviction in early 2019 or 2020, COVID hit and just wrecked all investment, just was completely off the table. Everybody's trying to get their company and portfolio to survive, pivot, whatever they had to do, et cetera. Nobody was going to go and be like, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to invest in a, rocket company. And so, yeah, we had, we worked scratch and clawed to find our supporters and, ultimately do the seed and whatever. 21 was a little bit of a better year. The market came back. And we were able to do a good Series A in that year. And then, like you're saying, so this was an interesting time because not only were we doing hardware, but like you said, we're into growth capital in terms of check size, but we're totally pre-market, pre-revenue. And so not only are growth companies, steering away from hardware and hard tech, they certainly aren't going to do anything with a pre-revenue company that doesn't have any metrics to, any of the traditional traction metrics. So, so that was really hard. And what wound up happening was we have a great cap table of people who had conviction in what we're doing, have a long-term vision. They know this is a company that endures different cycles and has to be successful. And they not only stepped up, but they stepped up and helped us, bring a more capital around the table. It was really, really hard. But we had a lot of people who had high conviction, and I'm, forever grateful for that support.
So things have shifted a little bit. You've brought in with equity and debt nearly $1 billion in your Series D, and the market fully understands that launch is a finite resource, and we need a lot more capability of it. Um, how so? You've talked about the importance of bringing on really great talent into the organization. The other side of that is the cap table, and if you get to the point where you have the luxury to pick the investors you're working with, like it's a 10-20 year commitment. A lot of marriages don't last that long, and noisy investors can be very distracting, and in the worst case, lead you down a path that maybe you don't want to go down. So, how do you, when you're engaging with this different type of stakeholder, how do you evaluate them around, are these going to be a good partner? Are they going to be aligned for the long term? Can they do what they say they're going to do, um, and show up and fulfill their commitment?
Well, just like with hiring, we try to put great people, they have to be able to do the thing, but they also have to be great people. And so we try our best to find great people to put around the table with us. It's a little bit of a different situation because you can't always pick and choose. But we have even in the hard times, we've said, you know what, we're building a long-term thing. And so we're not going to compromise our values. We're not going to compromise try to do everything without mortgaging the future. And I think we've been able to do that with good success, and, keep terms very clean, and, stay out of hairy situations. So our discussions try to screen for that. My questions to them are, geared toward making sure that they're a good long-term investor. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I always recommend that, founders should ask, almost as many questions as those investors are asking. What's the most recent deal that you've done? How many do you do? How much, do you reserve for follow on? What fund are you investing out of? How far along have you invested? Who are your LPs?
Totally.
Depending on who they raise capital from, it can have really profound impacts on, the nature of the business. So, um,
All
yeah,
the right questions to ask. You should at least go in with your eyes wide open, right?
absolutely.
You're not always going to
Absolutely.
have the luxury to say no here and there, but you should at least go in with your eyes wide open.
Well, we're coming into the final stretches. I have maybe one or two last questions to sort of get us wrapped up. But Matt, Seyka, anything top of mind that you were burning to ask?
I mean, we've touched on so much stuff from the leadership perspective and everything. I think, yeah, I've been loving this conversation.
So I guess maybe to round it out, Andy, you've built an incredible company. You've made it through some really hard fundraising cycles. You're recruiting talent from not the most dense, sort of area, but you're attracting great people from all over the country that are passionate about an important vision. Um, your leadership approach, really seeks to empower great people. What are some of the top lessons that you would sort of pass on to the next generation of founders, folks building hardware, focusing on deep tech problems? What would you recommend with some of these battle scars that you carry with you?
I think it's really important to, uh, you know, uh, I think it's incredible when you have these founders in these companies uh, who were started by people straight out of school. I don't know how I possibly would have done this company without having a firsthand experience on a lot of different things. That goes for management, that goes for building hardware, designing hardware, on and on down the line. Um, I think so. I guess there's no one size fits all answer to starting a company or when to do it or whatever. But I will just say that from my experience, you know, having the firsthand experience doing a lot of the things that we ask people to do has been incredibly valuable. And I think from a leadership perspective, one of the best mentors that you can have is actually introspection and empathy from your own lived experience. Most of the time, when you're in a situation, you're trying to figure out what to do, the best answer comes from what would I want if I were on the other side of the table? What would I want my manager or leader to do? That's it. But if you've never been on the other side of the table and experienced that, then it's very hard to answer that question. Um, so I don't know. Just work hard on interesting things and see what comes out, I guess. I also think one thing that we miss is the idea of ownership. I think Matt, you touched on it, but that's at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want to hire great people to take ownership so that they can go and do things that are interesting to them. If you're trying to micromanage them or be too prescriptive, guess what? You're not going to get the top talent. Top talent doesn't want to do that. Top talent wants to take on an interesting problem and figure out how to solve it. So you have to be able to create an environment where they can take real, genuine, true ownership of things, and um, that's pretty foundational in how we think about leadership.
Well, I think, we've covered a lot of really important topics. That little kernel of insight, I think, is the right place to wrap it up. So, Andy, I just want to say, thank you so much for taking time to, unpack, the less visible aspects of your business, but I would argue equally as important. And, there's a ton of insight here. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
It's
much, Andy.
great to be part of it.
Thank you, Andy.
Okay, cheers.